Oi, oi, it's your boy, Slacky J, Fights Gone By podcast. Coming at you on Friday, getting it in just before UFC 252. Probably going to be a quick one today. Timing's just run away with me. Apologies, but I want to get this in before the biggest heavyweight fight. Oh, I can't even say it. I mean, if you weren't around for Fedor versus Krokop, you know, I think it helps that Fedor and Krokop didn't already have two fights where it was kind of a sloppy... Well, first one wasn't a sloppy brawler, but the second one was a sloppy brawl. But I don't want to be too negative on this main event. I'm just a little bit like the number of times that I've heard greatest heavyweight ever, or whatever it is that people are saying this week, and the number of times I've heard hitting the body in the fourth round as the greatest adjustment in MMA history. Fucking hell. Get a clue. But I mean, before all of that, like, the most important story this week is that there were some cuts made in the UFC. And firstly, Evan Dunham, which was a weird one. I mean, I can't remember off the top of my head how he's doing record-wise at the moment, but I always, if I saw Evan Dunham on a card, I was like, why not? You throw him in with anyone at lightweight, you get a decent enough scrap. So that's a bummer. But on the subject of bummers, the real sad one, and the one that people have been hitting me up about, saying, Jack, sing it one time for old time's sake. We have lost Betch Kohea. We're at the point, like with Liz Carmouche, where the UFC don't have to keep him around to protect the Rousey legacy. We don't have to pretend they were good anymore. And Betch Kohea is out the door. Don't let it hit you on the way out, which, for her, could be an issue. Because, and I'm going to sing it one more time for old time's sake, but the girl's got an ass like I've never seen. And she had some funny fucking boxing too, which and she did the taunt against Holly Holm and got kicked in the head. So there were plenty of good Betch Kohea moments. She just wasn't very, she wasn't very good at fighting, but she was still top 10 in her division, which tells you how bad women's bantamweight generally is. There's been a whole load of matchmaking and shit this week. Just now, Dana White's come out and said that John Jones is definitely fighting Dominick Reyes again, which, we all do want because Dominick Reyes won that first fight. But then we've got this whole lineup where it's going to be John Jones versus Reyes, John Jones versus Thiago Santos to square that one away. Maybe Jan Blachowicz gets a title shot in the meantime. It's just like there is no fun coming up in the light heavyweight division. And that's the way it's been for a while. Bring back Rumble. Anyway, enough about that. Let's talk about the fights this weekend. Bit of a strange card, I think you'll admit. Sometimes people get mad at me for being a bit negative on cards. But I'm very surprised that, when you're advertising the biggest heavyweight fight ever or whatever, you put in, like, 4 fights that sort of matter. I mean, Junior Dos Santos versus Jairzinho Rosenstruck doesn't really matter, but at least it's like names people know. Once you get onto the prelims, you're headlining the prelims with Jim Miller versus Vink Pichel. Now, I remember when Vink Pichel was good, and Jim Miller is a wonderful man who I love watching fight, but is ancient. And then, the other big story is like the return of Felice Herrig. And if you're talking about the return of Felice Herrig, you aren't putting on a great card. But let's rap about the one of the 2 fights you probably care about, the main event. Daniel Cormier versus Stipe Miocic 3. The fight to determine who is the man to hold Fedor's jockstrap. If you saw the first 2, the first one I was really quite excited by because I saw Cormier doing some clever stuff. But then the second one just really frustrated me. Because, okay, let's get it out there first of all. Daniel Cormier has a very well-documented history of struggling with body shots. And this is something that I've been writing about since, I think, before the Anderson Silva fight. Because Josh Barnett did a great job of hitting him with stepping knees. And we talked about this when Max Holloway caught Alexander Volkanovski in their first fight with a great intercepting knee. And I said, tough dudes don't, they're not going to grimace unless you've hit them so well that they go like fetal, which can happen. That's the one of the best things about body shots. You could turn a guy who you could hit in the head with a baseball bat and he'd laugh it off. You can turn him fetal if you hit him at the right time, if you catch him breathing in. But a lot of the time you're not going to catch him breathing in or in that moment of weakness. So you're relying on attritive damage. But some people do not wear them well, and you can see signs of it. The Diaz brothers always, hitting the body like a few times in their career, but you could always see that they did not like it. BJ Penn was another one that I used to say, yep, hit him in the body. But that Volkanovski example I used because Volkanovski got hit with the knee to the body, smiled, circled off, did nothing for about 15 seconds. And that's one way to know if something actually affected a really good fighter. They're not going to show you, but their behaviour will change. Cormier was never that good at hiding that it really affected him. Josh Barnett hit him with a few knees. He would just stop working where he had been constantly pushing the pace up to that point. Frank Mir hit him with a few kicks to the body, and each one he leapt backwards. Anderson Silva obviously hit him in the body, almost won the light heavyweight crown. John Jones, over the course of 2 fights, wore Cormier down badly with body shots, set up a head kick in the second fight. The first fight, he went to the body a lot, but he was kicking the legs a lot too. Second fight, he's just focused on the body at all times. So any coach who watched any of Cormier's fights, you would only need to watch a few of them to even to catch up on the fact that he doesn't like getting hit in the body. Plus, the style that he had been moving towards, where he was extending his arms more and more towards the opponent to hand fight with them, allowed him to sneak in quick punches like the left hook to right straight or a jab up the centre and really frustrate. He shut down Stipe Miocic's jab, and Stipe Miocic's 1-2 and jab are the best in the heavyweight division. That's how he makes his money. Just good sound boxing. But in the course of reaching to check someone's jab and right straight, you make it almost impossible for them to punch you with the jab and right straight because they have to punch through your hands, or at least do something clever to get your hands out of the way and then punch you. But your elbows leave your body to do that. So the body stuff has always been there, which is why it's so bizarre that Stipe Miocic didn't go to it after, he had a year off between the first and second fights. Didn't go to it for 3 rounds. He tried 1 knee to the body in the first round, I think it was, and 1 switch kick to the body, but didn't get to the body with his hands at all. And then just 3 rounds, nothing going, really struggling. Cormier's getting tired by the end of the 3rd round, and he actually starts having some success, but that's more due to Cormier getting tired. Hits the body in the 4th round, immediately realises that he can just hit it for free, and does so. And, it was 10 or 15 body shots, left hooks to the liver, over and over, until he could, Cormier's hands came down and he just hit him in the face with the right hand. Now, I joked in the Filthy Casual's guide to this fight, which you should watch, that it's up in the air whether Stipe even remembers to go to this. I was being facetious because I often am. But I then watched the countdown to this fight, and Stipe's coach, who you will know for Stipe and I think Jessica I, he goes, the body shots, that was Stipe. He came up with that in the moment. And you're just like, fucking what? If you're fighting Daniel Cormier, your entire game plan should be keep working the body. Get to the body as early and often as possible, because he's going to put his hands on your hands. He's going to make it hard for you to jab him. And obviously kicking him is always a bit dangerous because he can always pick up your leg. There was a guy on the Reddit thread about that Filthy Casual's guide having a proper meltdown and being like, he couldn't get to the body earlier because when he tried, which he didn't, Cormier's right hand was there. And you're like, that's the same, functionally that's the same as not going to the body. If you haven't done the work to facilitate getting to the body, that's as good as not even trying to get to the body. Any fighter who gets to the body in a professional fight is also dealing with the threat of his opponent's right hand. There shouldn't be a fight where it's being offered up for free. You have to jab and then move your head, or you have to jab the body, or you have to jab and then throw the right hand to the body, all of which Stipe didn't try, by the way. When he did go to the body, it literally was just slip to the outside, left hook to the body, but not slipping Cormier's punches. So that's why I kind of hated the second fight, because Miocic, even if you write off the bodywork stuff, even if you say, oh, well, no one could... There was someone on my Twitter feed being like, no one knew that Cormier couldn't deal with body shots, and that Stipe's coaches couldn't have known that either, which is why Stipe's a genius for finding it in the 4th round. But even if you say, it's fine to not have done any work getting to the body and to completely forget about it and not even attempt it for 3 rounds, you still had a situation where Stipe Miocic struggled in the first fight because he couldn't get his jab and his right hand going because Daniel Cormier was checking them. Mummy guard, framing on the hands, whatever you want to call it. In the rematch, he came in and he, again, for 3 rounds, really struggled with that. He was starting to land in the 3rd round because Cormier was gassing, but he was still there. The 2nd round is just dire. He's standing there trying to punch straight through Cormier's gloves, which are, hands, palms, which are up in the line of his strikes, and Cormier's just, there's 3 or 4 1-2s he hits him with in the face in a row. Now, Cormier doesn't have an amazing jab in a traditional boxing sense, but he's capable of out-jabbing Stipe Miocic just by denying Stipe his jab altogether. And this happened to like GSP against Johnny Hendricks, again referencing the Filthy Casuals guide, which you should watch. But like guys who just rely on that jab so much that when you do something, when you overcommit to taking that weapon away, you have to make some sacrifices defensively. Your elbows come away from your body, which takes, opens up your body, but also takes away the coiled spring that is your punch when you put your hands forward to just overcommit to checking their jab. But if you don't do anything to capitalize on that, then what are you going to do? You're just trying to ram a square peg through a round hole. Now, if you want to watch a rematch with Cormier done perfectly, go watch the John Jones one. Now, I thought Cormier was doing some good stuff in the John Jones rematch, but whenever they were hand fighting, John Jones he'd get southpaw for most of it too. And John Jones is like a natural orthodox fighter, so this is something that Stipe Miocic could do if he was willing. He would hand fight with him, change to southpaw, hand fight with him, and then either drop down, level change left straight to the body, and he would have Cormier stumbling backwards off that, or he'd hit him with the left knee to the body. Now, the knee to the body, bit more dangerous because, again, guy can pick up your leg. But if you're good at hand fighting, or if you invest the time and train for the fight to get good at hand fighting, you can do that pretty well, like Overeem versus Brock Lesnar. Your number one concern against Brock Lesnar would probably be him grabbing your legs, but Overeem was able to basically grab him by the wrists and knee him in the body. But level changing and throwing straight to the body, like even if they stayed orthodox, the jab to the body, if he keeps his shoulder up and he respects the right hand, the level change and jab into the solar plexus should be there. Because it's very hard even if you put your hand on the path of someone's jab, as they level change down, very hard for you to keep checking their jab. Or certainly harder, especially if you start throwing feints in. That's that and the right straight to the body. Those are things that you should be doing if you're Stipe Miocic and Stipe Miocic's team. Or hand fight and low kick, like Sadiq Youssef and people like that do. If you're checking the opponent's hands or they're checking your hands and you're returning the checking of the hands, you just throw a low kick. Certainly a low kick. If you kick below the knee, very hard to pick it up, especially if you've engaged the opponent in the hand fight. I think in the first fight, Stipe even threw a teep, which was pretty cool. I would love to see front kicks from him to the body. I think we all know that Daniel Cormier's gas tank isn't the best anymore. Like, he did go an amazing pace with Josh Barnett for 5 rounds back in the day, but that was like 10 years ago now. And in the rematch between the two, we found out that Stipe could take Cormier's punches when he wasn't caught blindsided by them. So dragging Cormier late seems like a great idea. And on the other hand, you've got people expecting Cormier to wrestle more. He had good success in the first round of the second match, that is, with a high crotch, and he picked Stipe up and slammed him down. Did his usual stuff from half guard. Stipe didn't look that effective on the bottom, but obviously, as the fight went on, when they came together in clinches, Stipe had more success. And it was at the third round he took Cormier down. I think in the first fight, and the second fight to be fair, Cormier found the best use of his wrestling by looking for clinches, by throwing his arms around Stipe when Stipe moved in, and then Stipe would drop his hips back and keep his head posted, and Cormier would grab the collar tie and hit him with the bus driver uppercut. And you can watch that land over and over again in the first and second fights. The other thing he did was like he'd hug him. So, he'd accept the underhooks or give Stipe the underhooks just to get the clinch, and then he'd push Stipe's head offline and swing his elbow back through to grab the underhook and turn Stipe onto the fence. Or he'd grab the underhook, and that's how the first fight ended. Stipe moved back and he clipped him with the short right hand. I think the dirty boxing, he also he'll throw a slappy left hook and take the collar tie, sort of Ronda Rousey style, and then land the bus driver uppercut. I think, but dirty boxing was working really well for Cormier in the first and the second fights. And the uglier this fight gets, the better it is for Daniel Cormier until the point where his conditioning starts to wane. And I said this right at the start of the Filthy Casuals guide to Miocic versus Cormier, but I think Stipe's greatest strength is not he's got the fundamentals. He's got a good jab, he's got a good right straight, got good low kicks, good wrestling, or can stop a takedown, can perform a takedown, has a good high crotch snatch single, whatever. But the main things that really impress me about him are his conditioning and his heart. Because firstly, most heavyweights have absolutely garbage gas tanks. But secondly, a lot of heavyweights just sort of collapse into themselves once the fight starts going against them. And that's how, Fabricio Verdum had amazing success. He realised if guys attacked him if he could get back on offense, the other guy would fold, which is why Fabricio Verdum's strategy whenever he was losing was to just spam hands as fast as possible. And as much of an indictment on the heavyweight division as Derek Lewis's success is, one thing that he does very well is wait. He's extremely patient. He will let you kick his ass for 3 rounds and then hit you with an overhand with 10 seconds to go or whatever it was against Volkov. Where most heavyweights, I mean, the most extreme example is someone like Gonzaga, but most heavyweights, the moment you take a lead on them, they just start falling apart. So, basically, like all rematches, it's like what has changed since the last fight. I was extremely unimpressed with what had changed between 1 and 2 for the guy who won the second fight. So, I really don't know what to expect here. But how funny would it be if Stipe just walked across the ring and hit him in the body right from the start? I mean, I don't know if I made this clear, but like body shots aren't free. Like I was saying, you have to work your way into them. And one of the reasons that he was able to do it the same over and over again in the 4th round was that Cormier was completely bollocksed. He'd run out of gas at the end of the 3rd. But for God's sake, man, don't take, almost 200 punches Cormier threw in the second fight? Don't take 100 punches to the face in the course of winning. Because after this, you have to fight Ngannou. Right, so what else is good on this card? Now, Marlon Vera versus Sean O'Malley, I wrote a big piece on for the Patreon boys, published it yesterday. If you are a Patreon boy, go read that. I mean, I'll quickly run over my thoughts here, but put a lot of time into that one. And it has an audio track, so no excuse if you don't like reading. But I think these guys really match up in that like classic chalk and cheese way. O'Malley's strengths are where Vera's aren't, and Vera's strengths are where O'Malley's aren't. You know, O'Malley is great at a range. And when you say like uses the whole octagon, people tend to mean like, yeah, it really uses movement well. I mean O'Malley uses the whole octagon. Like he'll throw a back kick and then run 3 paces in the opposite direction and sidestep off. He needs a lot of space to work his style well. Meanwhile, Vera, if you watch him at his best, it's against someone like Andre Ewell, who backed onto the fence and then Vera just beat the shit out of him. Front kicks to the body, coming in with with hooks to the body and taking the underhook or the double collar tie. He's great in the clinch. He slams his head. Anytime Marlon Vera enters the clinch, he posts his head against the opponent's jawline, gets his hips back, and knees him in the body. And they all react the same way, which is like, oh, fuck, he's actually kneeing me in the body, not just trying to wrestle me. And I said this in the article, like, wrestling is the main concern in the clinch because if you get taken down, you are going to spend a minute maybe getting back up. You could lose the whole round. I can count on my balls the number of guys in MMA who actually use the clinch effectively for striking consistently. It's Marlon Vera and Matt Brown. But, like, if you watch Matt Brown and if you watch Marlon Vera, they get takedowns because they're so effective striking in the clinch that their opponents start to lean into the knees. Like Song Yadong, really good wrestler. Vera hits him with a few knees and suddenly he's picking up easy outside trips. Matt Brown, you'll remember back in the day, used to hit guys with knees and then he'd hit that beautiful Muay Thai sweep or Sasai Surikomi Ashi, whatever you want to call it, where he'd like pull them forward and block the foot. Probably would never have hit it naked, but it was such a threat in the clinch that he could do that. And Vera's also really good at coming out of the clinch with elbows. Like he'll head post, hit the knee, make a little bit of space, and then start elbowing. He's doing that against Yadong. If you're new to the podcast because of this big fight, I do often talk about what I'd like to do to Yadong, and you're supposed to imagine it at home. But as good as Marlon Vera is in the clinch, he's very hittable out in the open. And I think that's really affected by the fact that he's so game out in the open. Like if he understood that you really see it a lot. It's like pre-eye surgery Justin Gaethje. You can see that he's struggling to see the punches coming. He reacts just a little bit too late. And then he gets into the habit of elbows all the way up, head down, sort of covering up. And that's really bad against someone like O'Malley who's going to feint him and then move in with body shots or knees or uppercuts. You know, if you see someone who's going to handcuff themselves and crunch up into a ball with the double forearms guard, you can throw out half-assed stuff or show feints while you line up a nice good shot to the big hole in their guard. But more than that, when Marlon's like, he'll kick and he'll load up a punch and he'll put his chin right up in the air, you can see the elements that like Jason Perillo's been trying to work with him on. So his jab's getting better. He will, from his normal stance, his head's moving and he's in position. And then as soon as he starts throwing his head's up in the air again, he's got really bad habits that he's clearly trained in over a long time. But really tough, takes a great shot. And what I was saying was like, O'Malley's good at getting off the fence, but he's not great at avoiding it altogether. So you see like the fight against Canoes, he very early in the fight, his back is to the fence, and he's doing the direction changes and trying to sneak out the side. And Canoes was doing really well by being there but not actually stepping in. You know, if you watch like Weidman versus Machida, or Julio Cesar Chavez versus Hector Camacho in the boxing ring, or Nicky Holzken versus Raymond Daniels in kickboxing, when you're cutting a guy off, if they're good, you know, it's very easy to cut the ring on someone who's not good as a defensive ring general. But if they're good, they're going to take a step towards one direction, move their head, come back the other direction, and they'll get you moving one way or the other and slip out the side. The moment you commit to one side, they'll step out the other. Two great examples in MMA, actually, by Eddie Alvarez. Second Michael Chandler fight and the RDA fight. Very hard to corner that man. He fought so well on the back foot. Or even the Edward Fuliang fight recently, when he was in trouble. He was along the ropes. Edward Fuliang's going to wheel kick him because he's Edward Fuliang. He feints one way, goes out the other, and Fuliang's left like wheel kicking air. But Sean O'Malley was doing that against Canoes, and Canoes was actually waiting, which I was really impressed by. However, Canoes did then rush in chin first and get check hooked. And like check hooking people as they approach you on the fence, not a very reliable way to deal with them. Like Junior Dos Santos caught Stipe Miocic with it once, but every other time he's been caught along the fence, he's ended up taking a beating. So for Vera, it shouldn't be impossible to get him to the fence. It's whether he's tricked by the direction changes, which I could see working. Because you watched him beat up Andre Ewell along the fence, but Andre Ewell didn't seem to know what to do from there, and that's not like a big criticism on Andre Ewell. It is very, like, firstly, a lot of people don't know what to do when they're stuck along the fence, but secondly, it's very hard to remember when you're under pressure, when you've had your guts kicked for 2 rounds and so on. To be that disciplined along the ropes in MMA, cage or ropes in any combat sport, it takes some doing. So for O'Malley, keep it out in the open. For Vera, try and get him to the fence, use the clinch striking, because, you know, you can hurt this guy with strikes, and if you can do it in a position where he can't really strike back effectively, more power to you. And then the other thing that I talked about I talked about a lot in the article, go read the article, but the other thing that I mentioned is probably quite important. Like, Vera had real trouble with Song Yadong because Song Yadong's very quick. And Yadong would hit him and he'd be covering up and he wouldn't be able... Like, against Andre Ewell, when Ewell came in, he ducked into clinches. You'll remember he almost got that arm triangle, like twice, I think, just ducking under Ewell's punches, because he could read Ewell. He was having a really hard time with Song Yadong, though. And he had a hard time with Frankie Sainz, too, actually, in spite of head kicking him. But he couldn't, just duck in on Song Yadong when he entered because he was having such a hard time reading him. And Song Yadong was so much quicker and showing feints, which, again, O'Malley feints a lot. I've seen people talking about him as, the greatest technical striker ever. And technically, in terms of mechanics and stuff, there's a lot there that we don't really... There's not some of the things that we look for in, a traditional, technical, great MMA boxer aren't there. But the stuff that does matter, what we call the intangibles sometimes, feints, anticipation, drawing, ringcraft, stuff like that, that's there. And that's good. You can get by with the shittiest punching mechanics in the world if you can read someone, if you can make them second guess themselves, if you can feed them ideas and mislead them. And of course, if you've got good distance and timing, that's more important than anything, and he's got that. But as I was saying, when Marlon Vera made the difference against Song Yadong, it was by biting down on his mouthpiece, entering with a hard high kick onto the arm and throwing a couple of haymakers, and then Song Yadong would throw back, and maybe he'd get hit, but then Vera would start backing out of the exchange, no more, and Yadong would chase him out. And Yadong had been very disciplined out in the open. If he was entering, he wasn't doing it in a way that Vera could grab a hold of it. But once Vera had hit him, or tried to hit him a couple of times, and Yadong was throwing back, Vera could give ground, duck in, enter on the clinch. And he did a couple of beautiful ones where he just came in, head into Yadong's neck, pivoted round, grabbed the collar tie, double collar tie, and hit him with the knee. And his clinch work in that third round was really just beautiful. There's a lot about Marlon Vera that I like, and I'd love to talk about his guard and stuff, because even against Song Yadong would push him to the fence, and Uriah Faber would be going, remember, no inside trips into guard. He'd be going break, move away, don't do that. Because clearly Song Yadong does like doing that, but they didn't want him doing it against Vera. But probably not going to be an issue in this fight. And one of the other reasons that I like the clinch game for Vera, specifically for this fight so much, is that when O'Malley's been pinned against the fence in some of his previous fights, he's gotten away as the opponent's dropped onto his legs. Because if you drop onto his legs, not only can he feed you the single and run out into space and try and limp leg out, which is what he did successfully against people like Sigma Tath and what's that other lad's name? Fuck it, can't remember. But He can also elbow you in the head, the Travis Brown elbows, which you can get knocked out quite easily by those. They're bad. And there's not any striking that you can throw back to keep the guy from doing it. And more than that, like if you spread your base, you get the overhook, you're controlling the wrist, you're nice and wide along the fence. If the guy's dropping on your legs, you can chill there. And O'Malley can get a breather before he tries to escape. Whereas if you're in the upright clinch, you can always be kneeing and then trying trips. And if the trips don't work, you go back to the knees. And I think that's really important. Like if Vera's going to do well in this one, he's got to keep O'Malley working. Because we've seen O'Malley, his footwork does become less effective in later rounds because he starts hanging out near the fence. He's not moving as much. He's not switching stances constantly. And I mentioned this in the article too. Like when I say constantly switching stances, I mean constantly switching stances. There's a lot of guys who will switch stance and they'll almost get more spooked than the opponent because they know that they're not as defensively sound on that opposite stance. O'Malley is constantly switching and immediately throwing, and that's what makes his style so effective for him. There's a lot of guys like, I always use Pat Barry as the example, but they switch stance and if they're southpaw, they're going to throw a left high kick. That was his one thing from that stance. The occasional big swinging lead right hook, but he only really did one thing from southpaw, and then he'd switch back. Whereas O'Malley does sort of everything from both stances, and he's very good at recognizing what will work best on his opponent's stance. So if you're fighting an orthodox fighter, you want a low kick from orthodox and jab from orthodox. You want to switch to southpaw to throw left straights as you slide down the right side, to throw high kicks and body kicks on the open side. And also from you want to go orthodox for spinning techniques, so that your spins are turning into the open side. Now, one of the interesting things is, as a switch hitter, like a good switch hitter, you are thinking like, well, if I switch to my southpaw stance, I'll slide down his lead side. If I'm in my orthodox, I'll work, a more traditional game. And so, the openings are different for you based on what stance you face against your opponent's one set stance. I've seen a lot of switch hitters in various sports. When they meet another switch hitter, it suddenly becomes kind of chaotic and they really struggle. Actually, you'll see it quite often in MMA. Like, you'll get one guy switch stances, and as soon as his opponent switch stances, he goes, fuck, and goes back to his normal stance. But like a great example in boxing is Prince Naseem, when he fought Kevin Kelly. Naz had been the weird one who could fight from like 5 different positions and work around his opponent's one stance. Kevin Kelly starts switching, the whole fight just goes to chaos. And I think that's something that Marlon Vera can do. He's comfortable switching. He's not as neat and tidy as Sean O'Malley, but by switching whenever O'Malley does, he can change what is being offered up to O'Malley. Whereas for a lot of O'Malley's fights, his opponent is a constant, and he's just moving in and out of each stance and taking the openings that he knows are going to be there. Anyway, like as I said, I get well into that fight, like inside baseball shit in the article. So what's left of this card? We got Junior Dos Santos versus Jairzinho Rozenstruik. Now, Junior Dos Santos is quite interesting because he is sort of like a sad shell of what he was. I mean, if you look at the size of him pre-USADA, fucking hell. But for a long time there, he was like one touch, dudes went to sleep, and he was really setting them up well, always with the body jab and the right straight to the body. He would put his head out there as a bait. He'd throw his right straight to the body, knowing that you'd come back at him, and then he'd throw the right hand across the top. But I was thinking, prime Junior Dos Santos against Daniel Cormier, I would love to see that. I mean, his lead leg is out there, so like Daniel Cormier could pick up his snatch singles and high crotches, but the body jab, like especially Dos Santos's, which might be the best in MMA history, he's got that Mayweather-style body jab, which is like a piston. And the great thing about the body jab is you are hitting the guy close to his centre of gravity. So it's an iron bar between his hips and yours. And if he wants to take you down, he's got to get his hips closer to yours. But more importantly, Daniel Cormier can't take a body shot, which is why it'd be so interesting to have that fight. But obviously not going to happen. And Junior Dos Santos now, I watched him against Ngannou, and that was just depressing. I mean, Rozenstruik's own fight against Ngannou was a little bit depressing, because it was just Ngannou's swang like a windmill 5 times and managed to clack him on the last punch after like flailing hammer fists. It was an out of character performance from Ngannou, but I'm always praising people like Roy Jones for that. If you respect someone, don't circle them for a round and a half while the commentators go, well, there's a lot of respect being shown here. If you respect him, try and nuke him in the first 10 seconds, so that if anyone ever says, we should do a rematch between them, you just go, sorry, he got knocked out in 20 seconds, which tells you so little about the actual matchup, but also looks so impressive for the guy who's just done it. Like Roy Jones, if he thought someone was going to be a hassle, he'd come out and do something tricky and try and take their head off with like a lead left uppercut in the opening seconds. But I completely forgot that after that Ngannou fight, Dos Santos got beat up by Curtis Blades. You know, at least he's got like another striker here, like, you know, a Derek Lewis type. Rosenstruck, good fun. Kind of, you know, was getting that fluffing up towards a title shot. They put him in with Arlovsky and Overeem. He didn't do his job against Overeem until very late in the day. But yeah, likes trying to time people with a sort of like hooked left jab as they step in. Did that to Arlovsky 4 times after doing it to his previous opponent too. Will be interesting to see how he deals with a very in and out style fighter like Dos Santos. I would say get to the low kicks early and often if you're him. Or just crowd into the fence, the standard dealing with Dos Santos game plan. And then John Dodson versus Merab Dvalishvili. I'm going to have to learn to say his name. I mean, I just call him Merab every time we talk about him, but he's doing well now, so, you know, might have to learn how to say it. But Dodson versus Merab, like it. Dodson looked really good against Nathaniel Wood, like best performance I've seen from him in years. He has like got into the habit of just sort of running down the side and pumping the left hand over and over again, but he can crack. Like, he's knocked down Petr Yan. But Merab's on the up and up, great wrestler. I'm just trying to remember like the really great wrestlers I've seen John Dodson have to defend takedowns from. Well, I mean, it could be a fun fight nonetheless. And then the undercard is garbage. But we're going to leave it there for today because I wanted to get this out in time for people to actually listen to it before the fights. If you haven't watched the Filthy Casuals Guide, I'm probably going to take it down like basically fight time, because otherwise the intern starts searching Daniel Cormier versus Stipe Miocic immediately after the fight happens and just takes down everything. So it's probably going to be gone soon. Though I am working on the Paulo Costa versus Israel Adesanya one at the moment. And if you want to read the article, join the Patreon, support the podcast. I'm your boy Jack Slack. This has been the Fights Gone By quick podcast, and I will catch you after the fights. Bechko Hayes, heavyweight booty bless.